To French President Emmanuel Macron.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the European Parliament, Madam President, let me first of all congratulate you on your election. You've said that we're all thinking about your late predecessor, David Sassoli, this morning, who, like all of us, believed in another Europe, a Europe of values which bring us together, a Europe built on a unique model based on freedom, solidarity, tradition and progress. This civilization which has matured over centuries, and for 70 years what we've been trying to build, putting an end to the constant wars on our continent and in this House, expressing in Strasbourg the idea of the will of the people. This Europe which, during the pandemic, held firm in terms of developing a vaccine and economic recovery. I'm delighted and I'm honoured today to be able to speak to you at the beginning of the French presidency. And I'd like to just share some ideas with you. I can't go through all of the topics. I'm sure we'll come up against them again during the question and answer period. But I want to talk about some of the deep convictions which lie behind our common views and common actions. This Europe I've been talking about, this European integration, is based on three main promises. One, a promise of democracy, which is born here in Europe and was reborn, recast on our continent, given new life in the last 70 years. A promise of progress shared by all and a promise for peace. And Europe has kept its word as far as these promises are concerned. The Europe in which we're living in was marked by some tragic elements in history, but now, if we look at the Europe in which we live in, these three promises are under threat. And we, not just in the next few months, but the task of our whole generation is to respond, root and branch, to these, giving new life to these promises. I started with the promise of democracy. This is something which marks us out as Europeans, and the French presidency will be one which promotes the values which are ours and can be often looked at as something which we have in perpetuity, but are in fact being weakened, because we're a generation which is discovering again how the rule of law and democracy can be made fragile. Liberal democracy, using the word in its political sense, over the last few years, this thing that Europe invented, people seem to think it's getting tired and can't meet the new challenges. But I'm here to tell you how these last few months have shown the management of the pandemic by democracies, with debates in Parliament, with a free press, with research and academic systems which are open and free, has led to decisions which have been taken which protected our lives, protected the economy much better than authoritarian regimes did. What we did was, frankly, together, show that this cliché is wrong, that our democracies are weaker. That's why we're working together to protect liberal democracy, to our electoral processes, which are the subject of foreign interference, to protect the sovereignty of the people. Here we have work which will continue throughout the spring with the conference on the future of Europe. The French presidency will, along with Germany, the clear agreement was reached as far as this was concerned, that your Parliament's legislative right is now going to be important.
Combat pour l'état de droit.
The rule of law. We're fighting for this simple idea, part of the universal human rights, to protect us from the people who get far too carried away as far as these things are concerned. Fundamental rights, it was decided in a sovereign fashion by member states to accept this when they joined the European Union. What do they want to call into question? That people are equal, that each one has a right to have a fair trial in an independent judiciary? And the basic idea
que pour être plus efficace,
that to be more
il faudrait revenir
effective,
sur l'état de droit,
we need to roll back the rule of law.
confondant le changement légitime de tout gouvernement.
Legitimate changes can be brought in by governments,
Mais
but that doesn't call the rule of law into
tous
question.
avons à nous inscrire
All
dans
of
cet
us,
état de droit
before we joined
existentiel de notre
the
Europe, dont les
European
principes ont été bâtis par
institutions,
notre
the
histoire
principles
et sur
of
le
which
fruit
were
de
set
nos engagements.
in motion as a
La fin de
fruit
l'état
of
de
our
droit,
common
c'est
commitment
le règne
and
de l'arbitraire.
our common
La fin de
ideas.
l'état de droit,
The end of the rule of law
le
is the
signe du
beginning of
retour au
authoritarianism.
régime
It goes
autoritaire
back to authoritarian regimes, and they have marked our history only
derrière
too
tout cela, il y a un
badly.
combat idéologique.
There is an ideological combat behind all of this, of course, and various authoritarian powers on our borders are carrying this fight out, and it's affecting many of our countries. You can see what's happening, undermining the very basis of our history, where tolerance
était au fond au cœur du processus de
and
civilisation.
humanitarianism was the very basis of our civilization. An idea is being pushed
Nous ferons donc tout pour œuvrer en
to
ce
undermine
sens.
the sovereignty of our people. So we are going to work against that. We're going to talk
Dans toutes les situations,
and we are going to
la force de
defend
cet état de droit.
the power of the rule of law in every instance. I said through dialogue, because it's not a question
Serait au fond
that the rule of law is some kind of invention made in Brussels, and Brussels are the only
nous entendons naître dans
thing that can run it. No,
C'est le
that's
fruit
not
de nos
true.
histoires à tous.
It's the result of our common history.
De révolution pour se libérer du joug.
There were revolutions for over the last century to people could free themselves from totalitarianism. So the rule of law is precious.
De reconvaincre les
And it's a question of convincing people again who have drifted away from the respect of it.
venir convaincre.
And we need to win over them again.
Parler de cette singularité démocratique européenne.
I talked about how unique European democracy is. That also is going to be in part and parcel of this struggle. And I want our European values, which bring us together, which we're proud of and are our strength, we want these to flourish. We had the Charter of Fundamental Rights 20 years ago.
La peine de mort partout dans l'Union.
The
Que nous puissions actualiser cette
death
charte.
penalty was outlawed throughout Europe then. So we should use this charter to be more explicit on protecting the environment and recognising the right to abortion.
Ouvrons ce débat librement.
Let's
avec
open
nos
this debate
concitoyens.
freely, talking to our fellow citizens,
Donner un nouveau souffle à notre socle de droit
and
qui
give
forge cette
fresh
Europe
impetus
forte de
to
ses valeurs,
our rule
qui est
of
le seul
law,
avenir de notre projet
making
politique
Europe
commun.
even stronger. That's the only way our common political project can go.
C'est aussi un
I
rapport
mentioned this uniqueness,
à la solidarité.
and it also, of course, is part of our
Nos sociétés
solidarity,
ont
which is
singulier
also
qu'elles ont inventé
unique.
avec l'État-providence.
It was invented, along with the welfare state, a system of protection covering all citizens from cradle to grave. This is a heritage of our democracy in Europe.
Et cette pandémie a montré que la
And the
solidarité
pandemic has shown that
est une force
solidarity isn't a weakness. It's a force greater than any other, because it allowed us to save lives, protect jobs. It allowed us to get together a vaccine for us in Europe. It's the spirit of solidarity that led us, as Europeans, to be the most open in the world as far as exporting vaccine as a gift. And
ce travail.
I hope that our presidency will continue that work, that it'll do all it can to make sure that everybody can have a quality job, better paid, with minimum wages which are decent and available to all, reducing wage gap between men and women, creating new rights for digital platform workers, to introduce quotas for women on company boards, fighting against all kinds of discrimination. The progress I've just mentioned isn't simply an empty promise or just words. These are legal texts which in the next few weeks will be given out to all of us, and which I hope we can make law during this 6 months. We've got the possibility of doing so. Let's do it. Together, a thing that marks us out as this promise of democracy is this idea of a separate kind of culture. What is it to be European? It's to feel emotion when we see the treasures of Europe, the fruits of our history, to the beauties of Paris, to the beauties of Krakow, the romantic spirit, the works of Chopin, the poetry of Fernando Pessoa. It's having a way of being in the world, from our museums to our cafes, that is unique. This is all part of what makes us unique. We've got differences, of course, but from ancient Greece to the Roman Empire, Christianity, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, all of this has shaped human destiny, and I do hope that we can continue together to promote this European civilization. Universal cultures, respecting one another, respecting people's differences and identities. That's why we propose that our best historians and intellectuals are brought together to build together the fruits of the common history which we've lived through. So that's the first point, I think, to meet the promise of democracy, making Europe over. And we'll have to work together on the next 6 months. We want to make Europe a cultural, democratic and educational power, proud of itself, able to meet these challenges. The second promise is the promise of progress. Europe has never thought about simply maintaining the status quo and sitting back. We were built by a desire to build economic growth, a model for the future, the possibility offered to our working and middle classes to enjoy the benefits of this progress. And that promise has been weakened over the last few years. Growing inequality, deindustrialization, new challenges, in particular the climate and digital challenges, have spread doubt throughout the continent. And our challenge, therefore, is to build a model, a new model meeting these new challenges, which will allow us to come through on the promise of progress. And climate is the first challenge. Europe is the area where, in Paris in 2015, universal climate awareness really began. It's the continent where, with its target of carbon neutrality by 2050, set itself the most ambitious climate goals on the planet. Now, we have to move from words to deeds, transforming our industries, investing in new technologies, hydrogen batteries. That's what the pact is all about. The Commission has come out with some powerful proposals, and we now have together in the next few weeks to implement many of these proposals, calling on all the stakeholders here and throughout the world to come up with, help us with the green transition. Dealing with the carbon adjustment mechanism at borders, which we've been working on for years, and having mirror aspects in the trade agreement so that they do the same that we're doing, that's vitally important. Europe needs to adopt the first law in the world on imports from the fruit of deforestation. So we need to take measures on these issues as the first planks in our strategy. We'll be doing this at national level. We'll also be trying to make certain that the battle for biodiversity and against climate change works as well. We're having a summit on the oceans very soon, where many member states and the Commission have an important strategy to present, because we are a major maritime power, and there too, when it comes to biodiversity, have got an agenda which we want to move forward. The second 21st century challenge is the digital challenge, the digital revolution. We in Europe believe in the diffusion of knowledge. We, the people, are not going to reject that, but our challenge is a double challenge. First of all, to build a genuine single digital market so that we can create European flagships and champions. Is investing in new technology, in new sectors, as the Commission has proposed on many occasions. It's consolidating a Europe that can finance these champions and can simplify its law so that we can build a genuine single market, a domestic market which is huge in scale. And at the same time, Europe needs to work with the digital stakeholders to protect this enlightened spirit, to protect our rights, our freedoms, the respect for people's private lives, battle against hate speech and division. That's why, along with you, honourable members of the European Parliament, we're going to be putting forward important texts which need to be completed, texts on digital services which you'll be ruling on tomorrow, and in the next few months we could see the emergence of a European digital model which simultaneously will provide for free and fair competition between stakeholders and stop platforms killing innovation and making sure they protect citizens. The second thing the things we need to do will have to allow us to provide economic protection for digital stakeholders, because sometimes these champions don't behave as champions should. But also there needs to be a democratic debate against hate speech, manipulation, when people don't ever seem to take responsibility for their actions. We need to bring in new regulations to deal with that. The third challenge is, of course, security. The promise of progress in the future only means that we can meet cyber attacks, terrorist attacks, illegal migration. As we live in turbulent times, we need to provide a response to these. And Europe, therefore, needs to equip itself, not because of a lack of trust as far as other powers are concerned, no, but to make sure that it remains independent in a violent world so that we aren't the whim of others to be free, in other words. Therefore, we need to make certain we have control over our own borders and our own area. We've made a great deal of progress as we've beefed up Frontex, and the French presidency will try to reform the Schengen area, which is at the base of its original promise of an area of free movement. Protecting our external borders, including having an intergovernmental rapid intervention force, backed by an agreement between member states, as we did between 2018 and 2021, building partnerships with countries of origin and countries of transit to stop the traffickers, and making a more effective policy which respects our principles to battle against irregular immigration. When it comes to defence, we can't just be content with responding to international crises. We need to be able to anticipate things and organise the safety of Europe to meet the challenges. We can see many of them were unprecedented over the last few years. And during our 6 months, I hope we've seen a lot of progress, in the previous presidency, under the German presidency, defining our doctrine of our own security, fitting with the times, and also having a proper European defence industry and seeking strategic independence, without which the Europe of defence is meaningless and won't even exist. You'll have understood that through this agenda we want together to build a Europe which will be a power in the future, a Europe that can respond to climate, technological and digital challenges, also geopolitical challenges, a Europe which is independent and it has the power to decide its own future for itself and not to depend on the choices of the other major powers. Finally, I mentioned the promise of peace. Our Europe today is confronted with escalating tension on our borders, a world which is winding into deregulation and the possible reappearance of the most tragic thing of all war. Our model, which goes beyond our borders and is why our founding fathers always looked outwards beyond Europe, is to think about some of our neighbourhood policies again and think about our role in the world to try to help build a real power for balance. That's what Europe can do. Europe can therefore propose a new alliance to the African continent, linking the two sides of the Mediterranean. We can't just look at the subject of migration without looking at the deep-rooted causes and see that we have a common destiny with the African continent. It's part of this turbulent world and part of the future of that continent, but also part of our own future as well. With Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel, we've wanted to hold a summit, and we plan to in February to recast our partnership with the African continent. We want our African friends to allow us to help them. We've already, by June, we've distributed 700 million doses of vaccine, and we want to have a new stage, come up with a new kind of alliance with the African continent. First of all, through an economic and financial new deal for Africa, which is based on what we built in May in Europe. Europe put forward and brought out the special drawing rights at the IMF and coming up with specific investment proposals as well. Secondly, an agenda as far as education, health and climate is concerned to help the African continent develop and provide new hope for young people in Africa. And thirdly, a security agenda. European support to be given to African states who are seeing an increase in terrorism, as we did together in the Sahel. Finally, fighting against illegal immigration and trafficking networks as we do, we want to make certain that economic, cultural and academic cooperation continues to flourish. Europe can't turn its back on the Western Balkans either. The Western Balkans are geographically and historically, for the tragic past and a greater future, at the heart of the European continent. They have wounds which show us how fragile peace can be and how strong our union can be. That's why today we want there too to think about our relations with the Western Balkan countries and give them a clear perspective of accession to the European Union, not against anybody to try to destabilise anybody else. It's a positive accession which will be carried out in a reasonable time frame. We are modernising the procedure of negotiation over the last few months. And it's not the present Europe with its rules which can become Europe of 31, 32, 33 member states. We'd be kidding ourselves if we thought that. So, in the framework of the conference and the results expected in May, we need to think about our own rules again and make them clearer, make them easier so that we can decide more quickly and more easily, and also politically be honest about Europe and a Europe where the Western Balkan countries have a place. We need to look again at the way Europe works and the shape of Europe. That's why the conference on the future of Europe should be followed up on a conference by a conference on the Western Balkans dealing with these crucial topics. Europe and the United Kingdom also need to regain trust in one another. I don't want to speak at excessive length, Madam President, but I'll just say that the links of friendship between ourselves and the people of the United Kingdom are there and will remain. Freedom, economic and social progress, what we've done together is too much to just be forgotten. But to continue to move together and work together after Brexit, that means that the UK government needs to commit to itself in good faith, respecting the agreements already concluded with the Union, which we will stick to, and we want to make certain that the agreements entered into are respected. When it comes to the rights of our fishermen or the Northern Ireland Protocol or the vital discussions which have to be had in the future. Let's be clear, let's be tough, than say that agreement entered into have to be respected. That's the way to remain friends. Europe wants to be an area of collective security on our continent. The security of our continent requires strategic rethinking for Europe, strategic rearming of Europe as an area of balance and peace when it comes to dialogue with Russia in particular. This dialogue is something I've been standing up for many years. It's not just a vague idea because we're so close together. Sometimes for us and for Russia, for the very security of our continent, which is indivisible, we need this dialogue. We need in Europe collectively to set out our own requirements and make certain that they are respected, and we need to be in a position to make that happen. We need to be decisive when it comes to destabilisation, manipulation and interference. What we need to build is a European order based on principles and rules which we can rally behind and which we put together not against anybody, not without anybody, but with Russia 30 years ago. Let me remind you of that. Rejecting the recourse to force, coercion, threats, free choices of states to accede to alliances or bodies that they wish to do so, inviolability of borders, territorial integrity of states, rejection of spheres of influence. What I'm talking about are the principles which we, Europeans and Russia, signed up to 30 years ago. We in Europe need to stand up for these inherent rights which are part of the sovereignty of states. It's up to us to reaffirm these values and effectively punish, violate those who violate them. This is at the heart of our European project, security, and it's a response to the destabilisation which some people are trying to undertake on our continent.
C'est pourquoi nous continuerons
avec l'Allemagne
dans le cadre du format Normandie à rechercher une solution
in the Normandy format to look for a response to the conflict a solution to the conflict in the Ukraine, which is crucially important at the moment. And your collective support, ladies and gentlemen, is vital to achieve that. That's why we will make sure that Europe makes its voice heard, its single voice heard when it comes to strategic armaments, conventional weapons, the transparency of military activities and respect for the sovereignty of all European states, no matter what their history may be. Over the next few months, we should come up with a European proposal building a new order of security and stability. We should build this as Europeans, working with other Europeans, working with our allies in NATO, and then propose it for negotiation with Russia. Honourable members of the European Parliament, I was born in 1977 and I saw Europe all around me as I was growing up. I grew up in northern France, and Europe meant peace. It was just obvious. You didn't have to think about it. Like a lot of you here, I saw a lot of Euroscepticism, the 2005 referendum, the idea that Europe was just a technocracy, delocalization, sovereign debt crisis. Our generations today need to recast our Europe so that it meets its promise of being a democracy, providing progress and providing peace. We need to give ourselves the means to make Europe a cultural, democratic and educational power, a power for the future, a power for balance. In order to do that, we have a number of crucial texts to approve over the next weeks and months, and I count on the close cooperation with the European Parliament, bearing in mind these texts and these shared ambitions. All together, faced with the tyranny of feeble ideas, we need to come up with what unity really means, the desire to take the long view and be bold when we need to. Robert Schuman talks about creative efforts, not banning things, not making things too easy. This creative efforts built Europe. Neither the policies from before the crisis or what we used to do then or the reflexes of the past going back to nationalism, dissolving our identities, none of those things will fit the coming world. Our capacity, though, to innovate, to invent, to make a dream possible, to make it real and make it useful to our fellow citizens, that's at the heart of our success. We have the strength, we have the means. That's why I believe in us. Thanks very much.